I was identified and brought in front of the school board, unbeknownst to me or my family, by the way, for consideration because I was getting in a lot of trouble at the time. And one of the members, Judge O'Neill, he was a school board member and a community attorney at the time, knew Dr. Bradley as personal friends. So when they were talking about sending me over to like alternative school situations, then he said, no, let's send him to Dr. John Bradley. And I didn't know what was about to happen next because I was hanging with a pretty rough crowd at the time. And when, people looking official show up to your door, then you have no idea what's about to happen next.
I learned about the CHAMPS program and realized that certain people that I knew had already been in it and were being blessed by the opportunities. And it was there that I met, I call them the Twin Towers, Dr. John Bradley and Dr. Regnal Jones. And it was there that I met Dr. Regnal Jones. And I was a sad, still little girl. And I said, I want to be a doctor. And he says, well, daughter, if you want to be a doctor, you can be a doctor. That was the first time that someone of authority looked in my face and validated that what I dreamed was not too big, that it was actually possible by someone who helped people become doctors. And that was the first time that I actually believed.
I worked with both those gentlemen 35, 40 years ago. They were preparing and helping prepare young African Americans who wanted to become physicians. And people were part of their programs, like Dr. Terry Mason, for example, and other outstanding medical physicians.
When I was in 6th and 7th grade, I lived in Inglewood. And I would see these brethren and Dr. Bradley and other men out in front of a school called Parker, near Kennedy King. I'm a kid, they're protesting. I don't know what they're protesting, but they look crazy to me, So that's how you think as a kid. Lo and behold, a couple years later, didn't know this was Dr. Bradley. He came over to Robeson saying, hey, I'm interested in students becoming physicians. Are there any students here becoming a physician?
So as a 6th grader, I was very active in the sciences and math, very involved in MEXO and science fair projects. And so we would actually go down to IAT as a young student and we would spend some time. I reconnected with the CHAMPS program the summer after finishing up. And so actually a friend of my dad's, his son was a dental student. And he was like, hey, you know about CHAMPS? I'm like, yeah, actually I was a part of that program when I was in like 6th and 7th grade. He was like, well, you need to go and meet with Dr. Bradley and Dr. Jones. And so literally that next morning, that Saturday morning, I had been out the night before. I was there Saturday morning knocking on the door at IIT. And so they were like, well, you should come and do our MCAT preparation program. So I came and did the MCAT program. And then Dr. Bradley actually introduced me to their program up at Chicago Medical.
Dr. Bradley is a great man. He's a very futuristic man, a kind with a purpose, very knowledgeable, talks less, but does more.
I participated in the CHAMPS summer enrichment programs. CHAMPS had a partnership with Robert Wood Johnson program that would allow students while in undergrad to take medical school classes, work in hospitals, as well as to do research. I participated in the summer programs while I was in undergrad for 2 summers. Dr. Bradley was instrumental in not only helping me get involved in those programs, but also just checking to see how we were doing. I met him and Dr. Regnal Jones years ago when I was in college as a teenager and found out about the CHAMPS program. And I'd always wanted to be a physician. And they just not only encouraged me, but Dr. Bradley saw something in me that at times I didn't even see in myself.
The first time I realized I had the calling to be a physician is I was watching an episode on television years ago. It was called Marcus Welby, MD. And I was just so amazed. And I was like, that's it.
That's what I want to be. So while I had decided to go back to school, some friends of mine were familiar and they were participants of CHAMPS. And I first became familiar with them because they said, go and talk to Dr. Bradley. And they were getting help with studying for the MCAT. They were getting help with finding rotations. And on top of that, they were creating a community.
My experiences span 20 plus years with Dr. Bradley, but it started, I think, 20 years ago when I was teaching here, Linda Conway, Dr. Sweetie was a student here. And some kind of way I got introduced to Dr. Bradley in teaching, through the realm of teaching. Dr. Reggie Jones and Dr. Bradley were the pioneers of minority medical education. And they were going to create an avenue for these students when the traditional the traditional medical schools were not admitting them.
CHAMP is a home. CHAMP is a place that you can go to that, as long as you are aware of it and you have a phone number or know someone who has a number, who has a connection, they bring it all together and help you in that path that you're taking.
CHAMPS is a health manpower development effort sponsored by the state of Illinois, started in 1979 at Illinois Institute of Technology. That acronym came about as a consequence of trying to see an effort by all of the medical schools that were attempting to increase their minority enrollment. All of them were lacking, whether it was University of Chicago, whether it was Northwestern, whether it was Rush. None of them had the kind of numbers that were going to do anything to impact medicine or health provisions, in our city. This effort by the state was to bring these medical schools together to look at recruiting and retaining minority students, particularly African American students, to have an interest in medicine. We were able to really challenge the status quo, and we knew what we had to do. It was work against those established institutions that had not been able to do their job, and we were able to challenge them in a lot of ways. We ended up going to medical schools all over the country, day by day, knocking on doors, saying, here's our students, what do we need to do? Here's the kind of support they're going to get. What commitment can we get from you? So we had to do that all over the country. If we're talking about, say, 200 graduates, you're looking at less than 10 that would be African American students. This was not only here, but this is across the country. This is the United States that I came from. I came from Project 75. And remember, Project 75 was looking at, they wanted to have 12% of the doctors in the United States be African American or minority physicians. We began with less than 2% across the country. After a 5-year period, we ended up with close to 7%. And they went to the president of IIT and said, if you want to make this program work, you need to have somebody that knows how to make it work. And so then I was fortunate, to be that person that they were speaking of. And I came that next year, the fall of 1980, because you got to remember, if you say we want these high school students, they have to do what? Give them an experience at the medical school. They would go to the medical school for what was called a preceptorship.
I've actually been put out of this very library more than once because of some of my antics at the time. I knew that his wife worked at this library, and so I was coming up to her constantly asking about this program.
He lived right here in the city of Harvey. I would pick him up on my way to work and take him with me during the summer to the program.
He kind of got my attention initially because he started out with medicine, computer science, and engineering. And he said, do you want to go to space camp in Cleveland?
When we get into the end of the 30th year, we go into 40 years. Now the state is looking at saying we don't have the monies anymore like we had. So those became the worst of times as those funds dwindled. Because when we had the funds, we were able to do something like Dr. Brimbert is a good example. He got a stipend. And so his stipend allowed him to be able to meet his own financial aid needs for the fall of the next year. That kind of compensation was really valued.
Med school is a full-time job. And so I had a really great friend who was at Indiana University. And so he told me about this post-baccalaureate program that I ended up entering. And so I let Dr. Bradley know about it. He was like, oh, that's awesome, sister. You're gonna do fine. Just let me know when you take your step 1. I got you. Went there, did very well. And so called him up and said, hey, Dr. Bradley, I'm ready for my check for step 1. He's like, come by the house. I got your $1,000 check. I think we were probably stalkers of him. Like a lot of students that ended up getting into CMS, his wife was probably tired of us calling, but we would call the house and roll up on him. And so he was really instrumental, I think, in this entire process of me getting that MD behind my name.
We have to structure the competence in our community. That's why it's called structural competence, where we were building our community in a manner that reflected what was important to us and what we valued. I would get mad at Dr. Jones, Dr. Bradley, because they knew so much history. And like, hey, I need to know that. The story I like to tell with Dr. Bradley is that he was the first one, many people don't know. He was one of the first to bring Dr. Martin Luther King to the Chicago area. And he was only 19.
So I first met Dr. Bradley at a CHAHMCP celebration, and that was around in 1995. I was like, Kwanzaa celebration, you mean people actually celebrate it? And Dr. Bradley and Dr. Jones were there amongst other people from the CHAHMCP organization. And what impressed me was that it was bigger than life.
When I was 12 years old, I was a porter in a barbershop called Herman's Barbershop on 63rd and between Aberdeen and May in Inglewood. An old gentleman came in, his name was Mr. Spencer. He and a gentleman that lived that had a store, they started going to the Nation of Islam. The speaker on those Sundays was Malcolm X. So Mr. Spencer came to the barbershop and he wanted me to go with him on Sundays. So I went every Sunday to hear with Mr. Spencer, and I was able to hear Malcolm. And then when I got into high school and then graduated, I got marching with Dr. King. So I was able to be a part of that movement with seeing both personalities from a personal perspective, not from saying this is Malcolm X who's different from them. I could see that they were both really the same.
It's very easy for me to go back to my medical school and try and make a difference and demand that they bring in more students of color, of African American descent. Right now I have 1 African American male in the first year medical school. Dr. Bradley took 6 individuals up in 1988.
What Dr. Bradley did with CHAHMCP was he gave us an opportunity to have a community, to shine a light that we could do it, and that we can go in and be physicians that were going to be game changers and change the world. And when you look now at what Dr. Conway is doing, it's the work that Dr. Bradley did that allowed her to go to the forefront. And so now she's taking that level and taking the new students in the community and helping them see that they too can be doctors. They too can be whatever area of field of medicine that they want.
We just not need 1 CHAHMCP, we need what? 500 CHAHMCPs, and that would not be enough in terms of the resources that we have to bring to bear on this challenge. We decided in 2016, when the governor cut the funding for everyone, right, that leadership with Dr. Akwajizi, Dr. Monique Alfred Jones, Dr. Ronald Rember, Elliot Forte, Roland Walker, Kimberly Bowder Miller, and others, many others, we said, whether we have funding or not, this is unacceptable. And what we want to do is not only increase the numbers, because that was the mission of CHAHMCP, was to increase the number of minority physicians. We said we want to eliminate that disparity.
So to try and stem that, we need to increase not only the number of African American physicians, nurses, pharmacists, dentists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, healthcare workers across the board, but have people that are culturally sensitive and people that care about the communities that they've been called to serve.
I'm saying it breaks my heart when I think of the fact that maybe only 2, 3, 4% of the physicians in the country are African Americans, which means we're way down We're way down in terms of nurses. We're way down in other medical personnel, and we just gotta keep on coming.
Back in the day, CHAMPS, when they were going through the politics of why there weren't more minority students in medicine, Dr. Bradley was going to start his own medical school. He said, enough. He said, we're going to start our own medical school, because we had 7 area medical schools, none of which were admitting minority students. No need to do that. We'll guarantee this. We'll work with you. And they pulled back on that and then started to become more integrated in the other medical schools.
We're standing on the shoulders of giants. And I'm just one of these people, that can't move forward without honoring the legacy of the people whose shoulders I'm standing on. There is no I Am Abel Foundation without Dr. Bradley and without Dr. Jones. It wouldn't exist. To hear Dr. Bradley, who is a man of extraordinary humility, but he looked at me and he says, what you've done with I Am Abel Foundation, I've never seen done before. I'm like, say what? You Dr. Bradley, what you talking about? You did all of this. Yeah, it was a little different, but ain't nothing new under the sun.
But the only thing I think for me to really do is to continue to be able to reinforce their work with our real history. So my own personal study, I continue to do that on a day-to-day basis and try to be able to make sure that we see ourselves in terms of who we are, that we have a clear concept of what identity is and who we are in terms of what our work is.